So what I'd like to do today, we're going to start off. I want to go over the way that I would suggest this swimsuit assignment. I haven't had a chance to grade it yet, but I want to go over basically the process part of all of that. So we'll take a look at that. We will look at depth mapping because that's has a great deal to do with your compositing work. And then we're going to spend the entire rest of the day today just working on doing composites in class together. Is that hopefully works for everybody. If you've got your tablet, you don't need to pull it out exactly right now, but go ahead and pull it out exactly right now and get it going. And then you can, my suggestion again, this isn't something that you're going to turn in. So if you want to start with a fresh version of the swimsuit, that's what we're going to actually do. So I'll let everybody get ready, but the swimsuit, the smoothing out the wrinkles for the swimsuit part, it's in session 10. So if you want to go to your student files in session 10, in the assignment folder, there is a folder inside of that that actually is 071103 Verser Swim or VER Swim 01, and inside that is a capture folder, and inside that capture folder are, in my case, I don't know if you guys have the XMP files. I think you do, but anyway, there should be 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep, there's 5 raw files, and then there is 5 also XMP files. You can select them all; it won't matter. When we go to open this, the XMP files don't open. Photoshop understands that they're just describing how those files have been processed. If you don't have the XMP files in there, that's fine because we're going to generate brand new ones right now. So if everybody can find that, select all the files and then just go ahead and open them all up into Photoshop all at once. And mine decided it's going to now open in Photos. I'm sorry, did somebody ask something? Okay. So everybody have this? Okay, so first things first, it's really difficult because of the lighting situation in this. And again, I'm just going to talk really briefly about the lighting part of this and how, when we talked about using a color card, so to do exposure, it's almost impossible if you really have got a very heavily backlit situation to actually use a color card. So again, you won't see this on the video, but you will hear it. But you guys in the classroom, see, this is your reward for showing up today, right? Right? Okay, good. So anyway, let's imagine that, here, I'm going to do it in the back of the room. So you may not hear this on the video, unless I yell really loud. But, so on the subject right now, you guys with the camera, and this is my backlight. So really big, giant, soft backlight. That's really actually pretty close to what's going on in that situation right there. So anyway, you take a color card like this and you pull it out, and the problem with this is that it doesn't have, there's no way it's really metering the light that's coming from that part, right? So it will give you a sense of what your available light, what your lighting should be coming from the front part of it. But the real major part of that is the edge light that happens along the sides of her body, and that's what you really need to measure. And so if you've got a card like this, there's none of that light that's actually hitting that card. So the way you meter for that is that you take your camera and you put your camera here, and I turn around and I point my card at it, and then you do a reading off of the white patch of the card. Here, you set that exposure to be between 245 and 250, and then you actually reframe your camera coming from this direction, but you use your camera that way. So how many of you guys, when you're actually in the photo studio, use a light meter, hand meter, light meter? Yeah, pretty much all of you. You should. It's just faster. It's a lot faster than shooting pictures of this, going in, measuring it, adjusting your exposure. So anyway, but if let's imagine that this is my light meter right here. So and again, this is going to be my light source right here. And you're taking your camera's right here, and I'm the figure right here. So you're taking a picture, and it's a really strong side light. Does that everybody get this sort of scenario, the setup here? So do you take your light meter with the little dome on it, right? Not a reflective one, but an incident one. Do you point it at the camera? How do you point it? You point it like this at the light, right? Because you're measuring that light, right? The same trick when you're using your camera to read this card applies, right? The card has to be oriented exactly the same way your meter would be, and then you need to get in a position where you can actually read the card. Does that sort of make sense? So again, in this same scenario, if I wanted to do this picture, even though the camera is right there, I would hold the card right here so that it's that light from the side is actually hitting off of it. And I move my camera around here so it's on the same axis so that I can read the card, set it between 245 and 250, and then reframe my camera, and I've got a perfectly exposed side light. Everybody good on that one? Okay. So I just thought I would bring that up because that's sort of the scenario right here. However, what you can do is you can still trust this to do your color balance, because even though that white patch is not going to read 245, if you hover over it, it's actually reading like in the 170s. You still can. It just becomes a gray patch, and it still should be neutral for this thing to be white balanced. So anyway, that's what we're going to do. So we're going to start with white balance. So I'm going to click on the little white balance dropper. And I'm going to click on, again, I typically use the gray patch that's next to the red. If you had those XMP files, there's a good chance that this thing is already color balanced, but nonetheless, I just want to go through this process. So then I'm going to use that white balance on the card to white balance everybody else, and then I'm going to use everybody else to actually do the work that we're going to try to do here. So I'm going to hover up over the very top frame, the top thumbnail for me. In the top right hand corner, you get the little three dots as you hover over it. If you click on those little three dots and get a drop down menu, you can do a select all, then go right back, and you'll see all of them got little white lines around them. Go back to that same three dots and say sync settings. And in this case, the only thing that we've done is actually white balance this. So as long as the white balance exists, and if you take a look up under, they've changed all of this shit all the time. I'm going to guess it's going to be under color. Do the drop down triangle for color, and white balance is right there. So that's the only thing I really care about syncing in all of this. So I'm going to go ahead and say okay to that. And then I don't want to open up all of these other, I don't want to open up the image that has the card in it. I'm going to go step through these and just take a look at the different ones. So this image right here, when I take a look at this, what I'm looking, well here, if we go to the second, or it will be the third image down, the one that's actually in the very middle, this is the one that we're supposed to be removing the wrinkles from. So it's the one where the girl's actually sort of got her head, chin down, and she's sort of like looking sort of, anyway. It's frame number 59. That's the one we're going to actually do the work on. But I know that going into this, and this is just something you guys need to think about, if you have the advantage of having the rest of the shooting, then you can actually steal things from other images that are in this and use those to do your retouching. So some of you, again, I haven't graded it yet, but if past experience is anything, some of you will actually have known that and actually employed that. Others will have had, others may have tried to do this using frequency separation. Other guys may have tried, you may have tried using healing brush tool, clone stamp tool, all those kind of things, whatever. But the best way to actually try to do this in the beginning is also the fastest way, and it's actually to steal bits and pieces from other parts of, from other images. This gets especially true. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that it's really critical if you're going to do retouching for somebody else, that they give you the whole shooting. You need all of those images so that you can pull, if you have a situation like this, you hope that there's a possibility that there's bits and pieces in there that you can actually steal, bring it into this thing to actually do the work. And once you do that, you're probably going to have to do some cleanup, but nonetheless. Does that sort of make sense to everyone? So it's just a really important thing, especially if you become a pro retoucher, that kind of stuff. They'll always ask for everything that comes from it, just in case. So another thing to think about, another potential job opportunity that you would have is, everybody tends to think of retouching as after the fact.
you shoot the pictures, and then it's all about post, right? But the truth of the matter is that retoucher on set, to be able to say to a photographer, well, you know, if you do this for me, it'll knock 10 hours of my work off, and I can save you a fortune in doing that. So in that case, there is nothing in looking at this scenario and knowing that this is happening, there's nothing to keep anybody from having a stylist go in there and yank this suit flat and hold it. So you shoot pictures of they're in the pool with the girl pulling the suit. You're going to have to rebuild wherever their hands are, that kind of stuff, whatever. But it just gives you the material that you're going to need to actually do this stuff. And so it's really, most of the really high-end photographers that I know, whatever, are always working. Their digital techs are usually their retouchers, and they're always working together on set. So it's just something to keep in mind to think about how you ultimately do that work. But it's also for yourself when you're actually doing, so how many people when you guys are shooting, and again, I know that there's a broad spectrum of people, of what people shoot in this class. There's some fashion people, some finer people, all that kind of stuff. But how many of you, when you're actually in the studio, shoot blanks of your background? Critical, right? Why on earth wouldn't you have a blank background to actually leverage your retouching? Why would, if I went into here and said, oh yeah, I want to change all the droplets in the water behind her head, but I don't really have a clean pool here to do that on. It's one frame. You can shoot it while the people are changing outfit. It's just, you need to start thinking of it that way, right? About not just thinking about shooting a final photograph. One of the best things about digital is that you can shoot bits and pieces knowing that you are pulling together the elements that you're going to ultimately need to build the photograph that you want to build, right? It's a different way of thinking about photography, and it'll change your life. But anyway, so this is the one that we're going to go after. When I look at the one right above it, it actually has a relatively flat stomach. I mean, the area that's right under her boobs is horrible, but at least the area that's under her stomach, that flat part is pretty good. One of the tricky things that you'll have that you can see about this one is that when I'm looking at this, her leg position and sort of like where her crotch disappears in all of this, I need her body to be, when I'm stealing a suit for this, I need to be able to see basically that same kind of stuff. And you'll notice that in the image above it, I actually do have a pretty good, so the relationship of her two legs is what I'm really struggling with. If you take a look at the very last frame down, I don't have that whole crotch area of her suit anymore. I've got the suit is relatively flat. The area that's actually covering her boobs is relatively flat. Her stomach, though, is actually starting to, because she's leaning so far back, I'm really beginning to get her rib cages to show, that kind of stuff, whatever. So again, I'm thinking about bits and pieces here. So for me, this becomes a good one to go after her top half, and one that's in the middle right here. Again, that's another possibility, maybe the top half part, but again, the lower half, no. So knowing this, I'm going to look at the two. So the second image down, which would be frame number 53, I'm going to use that for her, for the basic, her lower half of her body. And then probably it's going to be a toss-up between the last two for the top half of her body. And even though the top half in this one image is a little bit smoother on the very bottom one, I think she's... I'm going to open all three of them. As a matter of fact, I'm going to open all four of them. So go ahead and just select, again, the second image and hold down your shift key, come all the way down to select all four of those, and we can open these all as smart objects. That's not going to be a problem. So I don't know how deep I'm going to go into this. I'm not going to do a full complete retouch, but at least we'll get this going close enough to give you guys some idea about how I would begin to approach this part of it all. Again, if you have your tabbed behavior on, you might want to consider tearing these apart. I'm going to start with the lower half of her suit first. So I'm going to just dock what I'm thinking might be, it's a toss-up between two images that are going to be for her top half. But, so I've got my 059 image right here, and then the other one that's right underneath it is the one I'm going to use for the, basically from just underneath, all those wrinkles that are right underneath her boobs all the way down. This is the one I'm going to, this is the piece I'm going to use for this. So to start with, we're just going to make a selection of the suit. And when you do this, you actually want to make sure that you get the entire suit, that you get all of the edges, all of that. I'm just going to use the quick selection tool. It'll do a really good job of this. So I'm just going to grab the quick selection tool, make my brush a little bit larger, and then I'm just going to click and run down to get the whole suit part. I'm going to go after the whole part that goes on the sides. I want to make sure that I get the strap that goes all the way up, even though the strap that goes all the way up is a nightmare. So I don't really care about the rings that are on her shoulder up there. I don't really care about the rings that are down on her hip either. But what I do care about is I need to make sure that I get the entire, so if you take a look at my marching ants right now, you'll see I don't have the entire fabric that's wrapping around that ring. You want to make sure that you get that. So again, I'm just going to make my brush a little bit smaller. I've also got this issue right now. If you take a look at my screen, look at the marching ants right here. You can see that the edge drops off into shadow. I'm actually going to try and grab that, so I'm just going to run a line along. I don't want to get the shadow of her skin, but I'm hoping to get that. Realistically speaking, I'm hoping I don't need it. And then again, if you overshoot your selection, hold down your Option key to get the negative tool and push it back. Hold down the space bar to temporarily get the hand so that you can move this around and just to make a better selection. The other option that you would have in this, and which actually might be faster than the work that I'm doing right now, would be what? You betcha. All right, this is actually looking reasonably good. I'm also going to go after the fabric as it goes around the ring that's at the very top of her shoulder. And if it grabs some of the ring, don't worry about that. You just want to make sure that we get everything else going on in here. And I'm even going to go after the shadow part all the way down where the her lower suit is hitting the water. It gets a little confusing where the suit is actually picking up the reflection in the water. I'm not going to worry about that too much. You do want to actually, though, go down by her crotch and make sure that you get the whole, it's where the suit part is turning towards the camera. It's always that fold is coming around. You want to make sure that you get all of that. And I hold down the Option key and get rid of the shadow part because I don't need that. And there's a small part right at the very tip of the suit in her crotch that is missing. You want to make sure you get that. And everybody else is looking reasonably good. Okay, then I'm just going to jump this to its own layer, Command J. Now, as soon as we do this, we've actually got a relatively intact suit. I'm going to turn off the full image on the bottom, and I just want to take a look to make sure that I haven't missed anything. I've missed something down here on the front edge, but I'm not really going to need it, and I'll show you why later, so I'm not going to bother to go back and get that guy right now. At this stage of the game, I'm going to turn this thing into a smart object. So up to the layer menu, down to smart object, convert to smart object, because I'm going to transform this thing. I'm actually going to puppet warp this thing. So I want to be able to not only do the transforms non-destructively, but I want to be able to go back and fine-tune them and move it around and that kind of stuff if I actually need to do that. Then I'm going to push this out of the way slightly so that I can see the image that my destination image, the image that I'm actually going to try to do the retouching on, and that's going to be frame 59. So I'm going to grab the layer now that is just the suit and drag it on top of the image that I need to do the work on. Hold down the Shift key. So the Shift key does not bring this into register. What the Shift key does is it brings it in perfectly centered. So if you've got two images that are identical in their width and height, they're however many pixels wide, however many pixels tall. If they're identical, whatever, it will come in perfectly and register that way. But a piece like this, what it's going to do is it's just going to bring it in and actually put it right in the center, which may or may not be where I want it. And you can see it's a little bit higher than the suit part was, and so that part I don't care about. The image where this came from, frame number 53, I've gotten everything I can get out of it now. I'm going to close this up because, again, if you keep files open in Photoshop, you're stealing from your memory resources and it'll slow everything down. I know I've still got two images that are still open in here. I'll see how bad this gets because I'm also recording this, and that's a huge sync on video. So everybody got the suit on the image they're trying to fix? Okay. So I'm going to drop the opacity of this down a little bit so that I can see both. So I'm going to drop my opacity down. Mine's like a 68, so 70%ish, so that you can sort of see them both. I'm going to zip in here. I'm going to hit the V key to get the move tool, and I'm just going to sort of like generally place this on her body. The place that I'm really looking at though is the steel ring that's on her hip. That's going to be my anchor point. That's going to be what I go after first because it's just easiest to see. Again, you could pick any anchor point that you want to here, but that's where I'm going to pick mine. I'm going to zip in here to make sure that it actually is as close as I can get it. So I'm going to move this around to try to get it so that it actually sits pretty close to the one that was to the one that's underneath it. And then I'm going to puppet warp this thing. So once I've gotten all of this, I've just sort of roughly moved that in place. I'm going to come up to the edit menu, down to puppet warp. Puppet warp will actually open up, and your first move, again, most of us have, except for Paige, most of us have a computer that'll, no, I'm just kidding, Paige, no. I'm just trying to help you hate your computer as much as you hate it. No, I know. But it's your friend too, so... Anyway, that was a cheap shot. I'm sorry. I apologize. Okay. So anyway, your first move, and Paige, you should do this too, is to change the density of your mesh from normal down to more points. You just get a whole lot more control. Again, it taxes your system a whole lot more because it has to do just that many more calculations, but you get much finer control, and that's what we're really looking to do. Now, I don't really want to see the mesh on here, so I'm going to uncheck show mesh so that I don't see that, but realize that it's all still there. And then I'm going to put my first point is going to go right into the middle of where that fabric is actually going around that ring. So I'm going to set that guy there, and then I'm going to back out a little bit and see how I need to really orient this suit. So you can see right now, if again, it gets a little confusing about which is which here, but the suit that is dim, that's actually touching right next to her chin, that's the one I want to move. So because this is now anchored, the point that I've got on her hip is now anchored, I'm going to go after the same fabric but up on the other ring, the one that's actually up by her shoulder. And I'm going to zoom into this as well. And I'm going to click on that and actually then move the suit up so that it overlaps, so that I've got the ring up by her shoulder as well. And you can see it starts to move the suit around sort of onto her body. But remember, the way Puppet Warp works is that anchor point is fixed. It's just like a push pin. So this whole thing revolved around that point down at the bottom. So I'm beginning to get this now kind of in position the way I want it. So I'm going to then go after sort of like the cardinal points. So the next one I'm going to go after, again, as long as I don't have them selected, these push pins are fixed and they will hold the suit there. So now I'm actually going to go down to her crotch, and I'm going to grab the point that's right. Again, I'm moving now. The puppet warp is the smart object that's sitting up on the top. I'm going to grab the point that would actually be right at her crotch, and I'm going to actually move it down. And then you can see it's not really completely twisting and turning the way you hope to, but it'll get there. So then I'm going to actually grab the far hip. There's another, you can tell, you can't see the ring that's on the other side, but you can tell that there's the fabric that does it is on the other side, and you've got it, both the original suit that we're trying to fix and this new one. So I'm going to grab that corner, and I'm going to drag that up so that it lays on top of the other one. And now what I'm going to do is just piece this together. I'm going to go back and reset the one that's in her crotch just to make sure that I'm covering everything in here. And then I'm going to try to then push the suit. I'm just going to run along the seam, and I'm going to try to push the suit into place. So we can start sort of at her crotch. The thing that you need to know though, well, let's do this first. Go ahead and just click the check mark right quick. So that commits the puppet warp, but remember, it's now a smart object, so if I double click on that puppet warp, I can go right back in, my points will still be there. But what I want everybody to realize is that ultimately the goal in this, and this is the trick because of the suit, I don't need to get the edge of the suit right. What I need to do, I'm going to accept the seam of the original suit. I'm only going to change the fabric that's on the inside of that seam. So if you turn off the smart object, what I'm saying is that if you look at the seam that's actually the suit, the original suit, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing that needs to be retouched in that. If I go all the way up, even the area that's up by her neck, or that's up on her chest, all of those, this really sort of like ruched material that's up there, I can keep all of that. What I need to do is change just the fabric. So I'm going to use a mask on that smart object to then marry, or to basically have the suit, the new suit fabric touch just that seam. But in doing that, it means that I actually have to position the new suit, the one that I'm actually moving, it has to go slightly beyond that. You can't just perfectly line up the seams, because then you'll start to see a double seam in there. So I'm going to slightly overshoot that. So I'm going to go back to her crotch area again, turn on the smart object, double click on puppet warp, because again, I don't want to add another puppet warp, because then if I do that, it'll work, but it will not let me go back and edit the 3 or 4 points that I've already put down right now. But if I double click on the puppet warp, it'll actually take me back in. It also remembers that I'm doing more points, so you don't need to reset that. And now I'm just going to work my way up. I'm going to actually start down in the bottom. I'm going to click and drag, and I'm just setting down points. And you can set down quite a few of them. And I'm just going to work my way around to try to get this suit to, again, go slightly past the edges. And you can put down, again, you've got more points going here, so you can put down quite a few of them. And if we miss a mark here, if for some reason I don't pull the suit out enough, and I end up getting that double seam that I was telling you about, it doesn't matter. You can actually simply go back into puppet warp again and drag this out a little bit more. So if you guys want to, just continue to work your way around. And if you get the dreaded, oh, you can't put down another point because it's too close to the other one, just say okay and move your cursor just slightly over. So I'm just going to continue to work my way around the whole thing. In some cases, you'll actually, if you lose track of what, which one it should be, like, oh, I don't know which suit this is. So you can see on mine right now, as it's starting to work its way up to the shoulder, the suit is actually now gone. In the lower part where we started, the suit needed to be stretched up towards the top of my image. But now once I get up near her hand, it's actually got to be just the opposite. It's got to be pulled back down into my image. And so I'm just rebuilding the suit is all I'm doing in here. And now I'm going to actually get up. So I don't really need this image to complete the area that's right under her boobs, because it's as bad as the one that the image that I'm actually working with right now that I've brought in is just as bad as the original one. So I am going to roughly, I'm going to rough this in a little bit, but you don't need to spend a ton of time doing this, because this isn't the image that we're actually going to use for that area. But you might as well get it close. I mean, there's no reason not to. It just saves a little bit of time if we don't spend all our time doing that. I'm going to zip over to the other side now and actually go after that as well. I'm going to start kind of up in the back part. And you'll see that there's part of our new suit doesn't really have everything. We don't see everything that we see in the image that we're trying to fix. But again, if I can do 90% of the lifting here, then I'll be okay. All right, I'm going to zip back out and see how we did. Yeah, so this is roughly what mine looks like. And again, we're not going to do a full retouch on this. We're going to get this close enough so that you can see all the steps and that kind of thing here. But I don't want to spend all of our time doing this, because this is you guys will get the entire gist of what we've got going on here. I'm going to crank the opacity all the way back up again. I'm going to go ahead and hit the check mark to say okay to that. So this is now the new suit that I've actually mapped to the body. At this stage of the game, I want to put a black layer mask onto my smart object, because for me, typically the way I work is that I get whatever the patches that I'm going to use in place, then I hide them using a black layer mask, so that when I go to paint back in and reveal the fix, I don't do any more than I have to do. So anyway, that's going to be the way I'm going about this one. I'm going to turn my tablet on. I'm going to pray that it connects. Or I'm going to be doing this with my hand, my tablet. I don't really want to do that. Eureka. All right. Yeah. Okay, so to add a black layer mask, again, there's a million ways of doing it. You can actually add just a regular layer mask and invert it. But for me, it's just a shorter cut is to hold down your Option key and click on the Add Layer Mask, and it adds a black one. You can see everything goes away. And then I'm going to zip in here pretty close. So I've got detail here. Hit the B key to get a brush. I'm going to make sure the brush has got probably, I don't even want 50% hardness, and I want more control on this guy. So I'm going to crank this up to around 75-80% hardness, because I want to be able to paint this in along that seam line. I want that to be pretty crisp. So I want it to be new fabric up to the seam, but then the original seam to actually end up being a part of the image. So if you try to do it at 100%, you'll actually see the new line that you're putting in, but you can stay pretty serious on this. So 80-85% somewhere in there should actually be good enough for us. I'm going to actually make my brush now a little bit larger. Normal blending mode, 100% opacity, 100% flow. Hit the D key to default your foreground and background colors to their default colors. Make sure that white is your foreground color. If it isn't, hit the X key to make it that way. And then working on the layer mask, we're simply going to start taking out those lines and all those wrinkles. And so what I'm doing is I'm going to trace along the edge of the, and you'll see right here, this is exactly what I was talking about. Look up at my screen right here. You can see there's an area right here where the I didn't pull the suit out far enough. I didn't pull it close enough to her leg right here. So I'm going to fix that in a second, but I'm going to go ahead and continue to work my way along. So I'm just painting, I'm trying to keep the original seam. That's the edge that I'm actually going after. And I'm just going to do the whole area from the two hips. That's what I'm going to basically work on right now, so that if I do have to go back in, and I know I'm going to have to go back in and retouch or actually extend the suit down there, this will actually give it to me. So then I'm going to actually just paint across the area. You don't want to mix old suit and new suit. You actually want to make sure that you get all of the new suit. Even if the new suit has problems, that's okay. But if you start mixing old and new, you'll get a shift in tone, you'll get a shift in color, you'll get all sorts of problems in here. I'm going to show you a quick way to check to make sure that you do have everything that you need. But you can see right off the bat how much easier this is going to be than it would be to... I still got some problems in here, but how much better or easier this would be. At this stage of the game, I actually am going to finish doing this part of the suit down to her leg. I'm going to zip in. If you overprint, so look at what I'm doing right now. If you overprint this part and you actually hit her legs right here, it's because you have a round brush. You can fix that by then hitting the X key to go to black and then come in and just sharpen up your edges doing the black. So you can't use a brush to actually paint to a point. So you overpaint the point and then come back and take it away, because you can actually, when you do a remove like this, it'll actually then create that point. You can get a really sharp point doing that. So at this stage of the game, I'm going to zip out just a little bit and check to see what I've done. Hold down your Option key and click on the layer mask and look at what I see. So this is exactly what I was talking about. You can see the areas in my mask right now that are black. That means that's where the original suit is showing through. So I don't even need to look at this. I can actually continue, sorry, Command Z to undo that. I can continue to work on my mask just to make sure that this entire thing is completely clean. And then again, hold down your Option key, click on the mask again, and it'll bring you back to where we're actually going with here. So to fix the suit, again, yours might be different. You might have been really good and pulled this out. You can actually do your puppet warping with the mask in place. So I'm going to double click on the puppet warp again. It'll open it back up. You'll see it actually turns off the puppet warping mask, but we're not even using that mask. And then I can simply start adding points again. So I need to click and pull this out, and you'll see it respects the mask. So as I start to pull this out, it will disappear. And I'm going to have to go back in and clean my mask up a little bit to bring that point back, but that's basically should work for me right there. The other side is okay on that, so I'm going to go ahead and say okay to that. Click the check mark. So that's actually pulled it back. I'm going to clean that edge up just a little bit, so going back to my layer mask, hit the B key again to actually come back. And in this case, I need to hide that edge because, again, I want the original seam to show. So X key gives me black, and then I can paint this back in so that I get that black seam line back again. That part's worked out well. I don't know what's going on right on that leg. Oh, that's actually old suit in the, I have to take it back, that's a new suit. Nope, that's old suit right there. So X key to make white my foreground color and take care of that. You could also select the skin if you wanted to. So again, go to the quick selection tool and make it a little bit larger and just select her skin. Again, the reason this isn't working as a selection is because I've got my layer mask is actually active. So make sure that when you use your quick selection tool that you've got the background selected and then run the skin again. You could do this so that you have that edge to protect where you're painting with the mask. For me, I'm just working it out. Again, it's not, I'm pretty good with a tablet here, so I don't really need to do that part. But if it started to get really tricky, there's no reason that I wouldn't go ahead and load a selection. The issue with the selection right now, though, is that this is only selected her skin. So if I do any work on this, it's going to be on the skin. That's not what I want. I want to protect this skin. I want to only be able to have my mask paint on the suit. So you would invert your selection up to the select menu down to inverse. Even though it doesn't look like anything has changed, you now have marching ants going around the rest of your image. And so then with the your brush and a white, well here, I'm actually going to get rid of it. I'm going to paint black on this so you'll see what I'm talking about. I can come in here and it actually gets rid of that part. I actually just got rid of the mask, so hang on. Command Z to undo that. Go back to my mask, B key for my brush, X key to get black, and then you can see that's the old suit, but it's following that line now. So I'm going to hit X key again to get white and actually just paint along here. Did that make sense to everyone? Did I lose anybody on that one? So are we good on that part? So sometimes it's just faster and easier to do that, to select it so that you don't have to be so particular about it. But that doesn't work for the seams. So Command D to deselect. And then I'm just going to finish this up really quickly so you guys can do the same thing with me. I'm just going to run my line down here again to try to get new suit and old seam and put those two together. And again, once you get up pretty much to right underneath her boobs, kind of where that hand is in the back, that's probably about all we can do. Although I would overshoot this. I would take it all the way up if you can, only because you're going to need something to actually drop the new top on as well. And so you might as well give yourself a break and not be trying to cover 3. So I'm just going to do the outline of the edges. I'm going to come down here to the bottom and do the same outline down here. And then I'm just going to select the middle using the lasso tool and do a quick fill with white. You don't need to be, once you have the lines done, the outer edge lines done, you don't need to worry about. And again, I'm going to carry this all the way down to the area on the ring part. I'm going to hit the X key to sharpen that up just a little bit on both sides. And then I'm going to just take a look at the mask. Hold down the Option key and take a look at your layer mask. You can see there's a small little area right here. I'm still working on my layer mask that didn't connect, so I'll just connect that. I'm going to zip back out. I'm going to grab the lasso key, the L key, and then I'm just going to trace inside that line, the white line that I've actually just made for the entire edge. If you're not really comfortable with your tablet entirely yet, you could actually do a second, you could extend, you could make that edge a little bit wider. But anyway, I've got it basically selected. White is my foreground color. Option delete fills that with white. Command D to deselect. And then there's one small area right up by her shoulder, on mine anyway, that needs to be finished. And that should actually get me pretty close, at least to the lower body part. So then I can turn this on and off, and you can see it's done so much work that I didn't have to do, right? So, and then I would do the very same thing. I'm not going to do the top now, but I would do the very same thing for the top. Does everybody understand how that whole thing would work? Again, I would form it, especially, again, look at the outline of her boobs. I would form that part. If she's pulled too far back, a lot of times you can't really change perspective in this, that kind of stuff, but you can use this to sort of like reshape her entire upper body. So at any rate, that's what I would do. But at this stage of the game, I've still got work that I have to do on this, and so this is the part that I wanted to show you guys where I would sort of like carry this on. So once I did the top, so let's say we've already done the top, we've actually put that part together, select your smart object, the very top layer, and then we're going to do a merge stamp version of this. We're going to create a new version. To do that, hold down the Command, Option, Shift, and hit the letter E, and it gives you a brand new version of this, and this is what I'm then going to split. So I'm going to label this new version, NV, and say okay, and then I'm going to hit Command J to actually make two separate layers. I'm going to double click on the NV1 and call it low. I'm going to double click on one on the very top and call it high. I'm going to turn off high. I'm going to activate low. I'm going to zoom in to look at these wrinkles and to look at the texture of the suit. And then I'm going to go up to the filter menu, down to blur, down to Gaussian blur, and again I need to hit this as hard enough as I can to get rid of the texture. So I'm looking at mine came on with a radius of 2. That's not enough for me right now, so I'm actually going to change this to a 3. That's still not enough. I just, at this stage of the game, if you keep your hand on your backspace or your delete key, you can just hit it to remove the radius value and add a brand new one. Otherwise, if you use your arrow keys, you start going up in tenths of an increment, and it's not enough. Again, so I'm going to see what 5 looks like here. 5 is actually looking pretty good. I'm also going to check something else on her suit. I want to be able to sort of see like the jewel, whatever those things are, the crystals that are actually on her upper shoulder. That's a good indication of where detail would be. I'm going to use my preview button to turn on and off to see if I feel like this is actually getting it. Yeah, because I've lost all the stitching. I've lost really the crystals. I mean, I still see the outline of it, but that's only tone and color left. So if you want the same radius that I'm using, I actually used a radius of 5 pixels in my blur. I'm going to go ahead and say okay to that. Then I'm going to go up to the image menu, down to apply image. In the apply image drop down, I'm going to, for the layer, I'm not going to use merged, which is the default, but I'm going to use that drop down to come down and say low. Again, I'm going to change my blending mode to subtract. Make sure you're at 100% opacity, a scale of 2, and an offset of 128. Now again, these are values that you use for an 8-bit image. They are different if you're actually doing a 16-bit image, and you would just have to look at the recipe that comes with that. Everything you ever wanted to know about split frequency work PDF. It'll give you the changes that you make here based on that. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. Actually, I just did that to my low layer, so never mind. I'm going to undo that completely. Make sure you do that with your high layer. So turn the high layer on, make it active, and do the same thing again. I'm probably going to get a completely different radius value right now, though. So no, the radius value in the low is fine. So again, up to image menu, down to apply image. Click low. As long as you haven't quit Photoshop, the values that happen in here will remain sticky. So my low layer has been selected. That's fine. Subtract is where I want my blending. Scale of 2 and an offset of 128 with 100% opacity. Say OK to that. Change the blending mode of your high layer now from normal down to linear light. And then come down to your low layer. Select it, hit Command J to make a copy of it. Go back up to your high layer, select it, hit Command J to make a copy of that. Change the blending mode of your high copy from linear light to normal. And then clip. Hover your cursor between high copy and high. Hold down your Option key. You'll get that little square with a line going counterclockwise. Click on that to actually clip the two together. Hold down your Shift key to select all 4 layers now of your split work. So I've got my high copy, high, low copy, low. All of them are selected. Come over to your menu that's right across from the tab that says layers. It's flyout menu. Click on that and say you want to do a new group from layers. And then type in FS for frequency separation and say OK. Then back out just a little bit. I want to be able to see most of what's going on here, but basically the suit is what I care about. Turn your FS layer on and off. If you see a change, you've done something wrong. If you don't see a change, you haven't done anything wrong. Everything is good to go. I'm going to then open up the frequency separation group, and I'm going to go after the wrinkles that are down on her lower part of her body. The stuff that's down really in her whole crotch area, again, for me, some of those things I leave because I think that gives it a natural part. If you go in and you blast out every single wrinkle, 100% in this whatever, it starts to just not look real. So I leave in some things. I'm trying to clean up the suit though to make it look good, but I will, like what's going on down in this area right in here, that's believable to me. You know, the fabric would be crushing together because her legs are together, that kind of stuff. So for me, I don't take that kind of stuff out. I'll leave that in there. I think it adds more of a believability. But if you take a look at the wrinkles that are right up sort of above that, as you start to move up to her belly, that's something that's a different issue altogether. So I'm going to go and I'm going to click on my low copy. Again, we only work on our copies. So remember, in our high copy, we were talking about detail and texture. In our low copy, we were talking about tone and color. So I don't know how you guys work, but I can just tell you, for me, when I'm working on this stuff, it's easier for me to see it when these things are separated, not only split, but turned off. So I'm going to turn off my high copy so that I only am looking at my low copy. It's just an easier way for me to see what I really need to do. So I'm going to then I'm going to come over and I'm going to grab my mixer brush. That's where I'm going to start with this whole thing. So over in your brush set, click on the brush icon, sort of like in the lower right-hand part of that brush icon. You'll get a flyout menu, and you can come down and select the mixer brush that's at the very bottom. Up at the very top then, click on the flyout menu to actually set the brush size and the hardness of your brush. I'm going to make this a completely soft brush. I'm going to click again near the word that says Adobe to get that flyout menu to go away. Then in the two icons, so as you start to work your way in the options bar across, you'll see that there's a folder that's actually got a brush on it. That's actually presets. That's where they're actually saved. We don't have any presets saved, so we're not going to do that. The thing that's next to it is a square that's actually the sample, and this is the sample of what of the paint that is loaded on your brush, and yours should be a checkerboard, because the way we set the mixer brush to work is we want the brush to be clean after every stroke. We don't want ink to, or paint in this case, to accumulate on the brush and stay on the brush. So it's, imagine if you were really painting, it's like you dab your brush into a thing of paint, you hit it onto your canvas, and then you completely clean your brush 100% and start over again. And that's the process we keep doing. And the reason we do that is that that avoids this, that what can ultimately happen in here is that it will just continue, it'll mix into this mess that doesn't really help us. So this is just a way to, it gives you finer control. So anyway, to make sure that that's happening, you need to look at the two icons that are next to that. It's two brushes. The first icon, and it's supposed to be, the way this is supposed to work is that if you actually have it clicked and active, if you have the button pushed in, it's got a darker background. So if you click on it, you'll see this also loads my brush now. That's not what I want. So I'm going to unclick this so that the first of the icons, the one on the left, is actually not pushed in, but the one on the right actually is pushed in. You don't need to worry about the drop-down menu here, because this drop-down will actually, those settings that we're using here are building a custom brush. So this is, it's not a blending mode, it's the behavior of your brush. I'm going to use a wetness of 20, a load of 100, and a mix of 100, and a flow anywhere from like 40 up. You can go all the way up to 100. So what flow will do for you is actually, as you start to increase your flow, it'll make things go faster. So I'm going to boost mine up. Mine was at 23. I'm going to boost mine up to low 40s, and then make my brush smaller. Make sure that I'm working on my low copy, not the low one, but the low copy. And then I'm simply going to, you can see, I've got a highlight and a shadow that I need to get rid of. That's causing this wrinkle. So look at my screen if you don't know which one I'm talking about. I'm going for the wrinkle that's actually closest to her crotch. That's the first one I'm going to go after. You need to sample from a place that you want to then drag across this. So I'm going to grab the area that is moving towards the left. So I'm dragging left to right, and I'm going to just start dragging through this part. And then I get bored with this stuff, so I'm going to actually do the opposite. I'm also then going to drag from the bottom up, because I'm trying to go after that shadow part. And I just continue to work this, and then I'm going to go after the one that's sitting right above it. And also, so I'm just tapping across this to try to smooth all of this out. There's some other stuff in here that I would go after as well. And if you reach the point where it's not actually getting any lighter, so that highlight, if I continue to hammer this pretty hard, eventually I'll get this. But if you feel like, oh God, this is just not going fast enough for me, your other option is to actually go to a normal brush. So I'm going to go back over to my brush menu. I'm going to click on that flyout menu, and I'm going to pick just a normal regular brush, not the mixer brush, just a regular brush. You'll notice that everything up on your screen, your options pad, changes again. Click your drop-down menu, because the brush settings that you use for mixer brush are not the ones, they're not inherited when you go to actually this normal brush. You can see mine is still up at that 82%, which is what I was using when I was trying to paint the mask for this smart object. I'm going to make it all the way soft again, so I'm just dragging it down to its 0% hardness, 100% blending mode, 100% opacity, and drop your flow down to like 6%. You need to really bring your flow down. So I'm going to keep it around 6, 4, 5%, something. It'll be close enough. Hover over the area. So I'm still looking at that highlight. It's most of it's gone, but I've still got a little bit of that highlight right there that I want to sort of soften up. If you hold down your Option key and click on the darker area, it will sample that darker area color, and then simply come over the highlight area that you're trying to push down to make it a little bit darker, and just start scrubbing across it. And you can see, in my case, that was way too fast. So it went way too dark, way too quick. I'm going to hit Command-Z to undo that, and I'm going to drop my flow down even more. I'm going to take it down to a 1% to really give me the control. And then I'm just going to scrub across that, and it's gone. I'm actually going to scrub across the one that's on the very top. And you can use that same color to actually do the lightening of the shadow as well. So I'm going to scrub across that. When you're doing this kind of work with this kind of brush, do not use a single color. Resample a lot. So I'm going to come over here to another part of the image, hold down my Option key, and just resample, and then run across that part up here and resample. I'm going to go back to my mixer brush. Again, my mixer brush, all those settings are now set. I don't need to worry about those anymore. And I'm going to drag across that area. I'm going to try to soften up all these edges. So there's areas you'll see as you start to work your way up that you can just soften. I'm not trying to eliminate them. I'm just trying to soften them up. If you feel like you don't really know what you're doing, go ahead and turn the eyeball on for your high layer and you'll be able to spot it. So I can see this one right here that actually needs to be fixed. I'm still working on my low copy and I can just hit across this. Sometimes you'll find that this might not go. So look at this area that I'm talking about here. I've still got these two like really dark sets of lines where those wrinkles were. If you turn your eyeball for your low copy on and off, those are still underneath. That tells you that this is actually in your high copy. This is now texture. It's a darker texture, so even though we would think that would be tone, it's not. This actually came up into the higher layer. So I'm going to click on my high copy. Again, if you want to only work on the high copy to see what it is you're really doing, turn off the eyeball for your low copy and low as well. And again, working just in this high copy part right here, you can see, oh, that picked up a huge amount of contrast. Never mind. I'm going to go ahead and leave my low copy part on. Hang on 1 second. Yeah, it'll still give it to us. So again, with just your low copy turned off, you'll actually, yeah, get that. Okay, so again, when you're actually doing your high frequency work at this stage of the game, you only want, not only, 99% of the time, you want to use your clone stamp tool. So it's the S key to get the clone stamp tool. Then you need to check this for your clone stamp. We're actually going to make this extremely hard, so I'm going to bring this up to around an 85%. Again, we are now changing texture, and you do not want those soft edge brush, because a soft edge brush will mix old texture with new texture, and the result is you've ruined the texture. So again, a relatively hard brush makes that that area where the old and the new meet each other really, really, really small, which is what I want. Again, I'm going to leave my blending mode at normal, opacity at normal, and flow at normal. Make my brush larger. Hold down my option key. Click to sample an area of where texture is that I want, and then just simply, oh, and when I drag across like this, look at what happens to my screen. I get this really weird color. Sometimes it turns out purple, sometimes it turns out really yellow. The reason that's happening is that I've got my sample up in my options set to current and below. You can only do this on the current layer. So Command Z to undo that. Click on that drop down menu and go to current layer, and then you can do the same trick all over again. Sample that area and then simply work out to actually get rid of that part. And then turn on your low copy and everything is actually gone. If we zip back out, you can see all of this has been smoothed out. Now, that's doing the work on a detail level. On another level, we can actually look, and this is sort of akin to doing the detail work when we're tonal retouching and the tonal retouching large area. I'm going to go back to my low copy right now. I just want to smooth all of this out. I'm feeling like all of this, and I also feel like the color in here has got a little bit too much purple in it, that kind of thing. So I'm going to go back to my mixer brush. Working on my low copy, I'm going to make my mixer brush considerably larger. And then again, I'm just going to start to work these areas around. This 42 flow might be a little fast. We'll just see. But again, I'm just going to start working it out here to smooth out. And again, I'm going to drag some of the lighter area up into that that really purple area that's happening up in here. I'm going to work my way out on these guys, and I'm just going to smooth this part out. If you feel like the purple part is a little bit too much in color, again, go back to your normal brush, make it larger. Still working on your low copy, because again, that's only tone and color. Sample an area down here that's actually got a little bit more color to it. I'm going to actually sample an area up here on the higher side of that, because I'm concerned that I'm going to do a tone that's too dark in here. So actually, I'm going to sample right over here. This is where, so look at the screen if you want to see where I'm going to sample from. Hold down the option key, click to actually do a sample there. Again, with a really low flow, we'll be able to bring this in slow. And if I do a Command Z back and forth, you can see I'm sucking out that color. So basically, this is the beginning of where I would go with this. Make sense? Any questions? You can close this guy up. You do not need to save that. Shoot. Yes. So again, you would use a layer mask with a soft brush to actually put those two together, to bring that line together. Does that make sense? You sure? Right. Yeah, you would, again, a layer mask with an extremely soft edge. But actually that brings up an interesting thing. So let me show you guys about working with layer mask to get that sort of edge, if that's what you're really sort of, you know, that's the kind of blend that you actually want to do. So do this with me. We're just going to do a brand new file. We'll do a synthetic file just to see. I'm going to use my drop down menu to go to inches, and we'll just do, I'm going to do 10 inches wide by 8 inches tall at 300 pixels per inch. What? 300 pixels per inch. My computer's not happy. I'm sure Paige is hexing my computer right now because of my snide remark about hers. I'm so sorry. Okay. Yeah, I was. Okay, I'm gonna add a blank layer on top of this guy just to give me something to work with. I'm going to grab the marquee tool, the M key, and I'm just gonna select half of this. I just wanna actually, so I'm gonna click and drag down to start to draw out my selection. Hold down the space bar so that I can move this around. I'm gonna goose the top left-hand corner up into the top left-hand corner of my image. Let go of the space bar and come down roughly about in the middle and just let go. I'm going to hit the D key to default my foreground and background colors to be black and white. Black is now my foreground color, so if I go Option Delete, it fills it with black. Command D to deselect. So basically, I've got an edge now that's half black and half white on this. At this stage of the game, I am going to go to the pasteboard. It's just simpler to do. Well, it's not only simpler; it's actually more effective. So I want to blur these two together. That's my goal in all of this. So I'm going to hit the F key to get to the pasteboard. I'm going to put a layer mask on this guy. So I'm just going to add a layer mask to it, just a regular white layer mask. I'm going to hit my B key to get a brush. Make sure it's a completely soft brush. And say okay to that. Normal blending mode, 100% opacity, and 100% flow. And go ahead and make it relatively large. But here's the trick now. So I've got a relatively large brush that's going on here, and it's got a completely soft edge. If you paint right down the middle, so I'm going to hover my the center of my brush right over the center part of this and click and drag down. Nothing happens because white is my foreground color. I need it to be black, so hit my X key and try the same thing again. I'm going to click and just drag down like this. And you can see that it blends the two together, but it's a really fast blend that's actually happening right here. So if I want this blend to actually be more gradual, what I can do is I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. I'm going to make my brush gigantic. So I am going to continue to make this larger because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make that edge that is where it's going from completely solid paint to completely no paint at all. I'm trying to make that edge bigger, and the larger my brush is, the larger that area is. And now I'm just using the very edge of my brush. I'm not going to center it over here. I'm just using the edge of my brush, and I can click and pull down, and you can see it's a much softer, more gradual move here. That I've extended that range considerably, going from black ultimately to white. Does that sort of make sense? So when you're talking about putting those two things together, you don't want to paint a solid line where you're putting the top together with the bottom. You would use just an edge of a much larger brush to let those two drift together softer and easier. Does that kind of make sense? There's another thing that you can actually do in this if this doesn't work for you. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that part. You can try using a gradient for this. So hit the G key to actually, I'm still working on my layer mask. Hit the G key for a gradient, and again, in my drop-down menu in the options panel, I'm going to select classic gradient. I am going to, in the drop-down menu for the type of gradient, I don't want this to go from foreground to transparent. I want it to go from foreground to background, so I'm going to click on the drop-down menu to open it up. I'm going to open up my basic gradients. I'm going to click on the one at the very front, or the one that's the furthest to the left. That's foreground to background. I'm going to then click all the way over just in my menu. I don't want to hit any of my menu guys over here to just get that flyout menu to go away, so I'm just going to tap over there. Then I'm going to change this to a linear gradient. So if you look at the 5 little icons, the types of gradient, it's the one that's farthest to the left. So then you can come down here to your image. Again, I'm working on my layer mask. If I'm going to click really close to where the black and the white meet, and I'm going to click and simply drag to the side, if you hold down your shift key, it will restrict that movement to either perpendicular, or it'll do it in degrees in 45 degrees. So if you hold down your shift key, and you'll notice it'll actually drag out straight in a horizontal line. If you start to push it up, it will only allow you to go immediately to snap to a 45-degree angle. If you continue to go up, it will only go 90 degrees up perpendicular, and then the same thing happens on the other side. So this will keep it in the 45-degree increments, but in our case, I only want it to be a horizontal one. And I'm going to keep it, again, very close to the edge where these two things meet, and I'm going to let go, and you can see it has a very small gradient area that it puts it in. Now, in this case, it didn't do what I wanted to do. I was hoping to keep the black and the white. This actually just gave me a small edge of it right here. So in that case, I'm going to hit, instead, I'm going to drag in the other direction. You do not have to hit undo, because what happens with the gradient tool is it will always overwrite the one that's happened before. So I'm going to click on the other side now. Sorry. I'm going to click on the other side now, on the white side, and I'm going to click and drag to the left, holding down the shift key. So I'm going right to left now, and this gives me what I was hoping to actually have. And you can see it's an extremely fast transition, because that gradient, the length that I drew that out is from black to white. And if you hold down your option key and click on the layer mask, you'll see it happens in the transition is extremely fast. If you want the transition to be less fast, I'm going to start in the middle now. I'm actually going to go back so you can see my image. So I'm going to hold down the option key and click on my mask again. I'm going to start in the middle of the white, and I'm still going to drag right to left, and I'm going to click and hold it and go sort of like middle to middle. Hold down the shift key so that it goes in that direction. And so I get a much softer transition when that part happens. Does that make sense, everyone, what's going on? Okay, compound gradients. How do we do that? So this is the gradient that I want. But now I would love to have also a gradient that comes from top to bottom. And the problem is that if I grab this gradient and drag straight down, hold down the shift key to get it, I don't get both. It overwrites the last one. Does that sort of make sense what's going on? This is going to be easier to see if we don't have a two-toned black and white thing going on in here. So fill your mask here. If you're doing this with me, fill your mask here with white. Again, white is my background color, so just Command Delete will actually fill it with white. And then click on your pixel content here. I'm going to fill the entire thing with black, because it gets confusing when you're looking at a black and a white, if that's your image, and then you're throwing a gradient on top of it. So I'm going to make the entire thing black. So simply select it, the pixel content, hold down the option key and hit delete, makes the entire thing black. So now I'm going to do my gradient. Go back to your layer mask. I'm going to click and drag a line across, hold down my shift key and let go, and you get this gradient. You see this part. But if I want to get both a gradient going right to left, but also top to bottom. And if I click and drag top to bottom down, it overwrites the gradient left to right. So to fix that, I'm going to hit Command Z to undo. You put your whole layer into a group. So to add a group, go down to the bottom of your layers palette. There's a little icon that looks like a folder. Click on the folder. it gives you a group, but this is not in the group right now. So to take this layer and put it into the group, you need to click on it and drag it up until you get the blue lines to go all the way around the group and let go. And you'll see it shifts the entire layer over to the right, and it is now in the group. And now I can add a layer mask to the group. So select the group itself, add a layer mask to it, and in this layer mask, you can do a gradient from top down to bottom. And this is now a compound gradient. And you can continue to do that over and over and over. Again, because of that overwriting behavior, let's say I wanted to add another gradient coming in from the lower corner. I'm going to collapse this group. I'm going to create another group. I'm going to take my first group, drag it inside my second group. I'm going to collapse that now. I'm going to add a layer mask to my second group, and then I'm going to pull a gradient up from the corner and hold down the shift key. It'll give me a 45-degree angle. And now I've got 3 gradients that are actually happening on here, and you can do this forever. Make sense? All right. F key to get back to the base bar. F key again. We can close up all of this stuff. I want to go through depth map really quickly, then we'll take a break and we'll come back and we'll start working on comps. Oh, we're also going to look at snow, if you're okay with that. Yeah? Okay. I've still got images that are still open. If you come up to your window menu, remember I docked 2 of them. If you come up to your window menu, you'll see down at the very bottom, it actually has them. You can actually pick them down there so that they open up and you can close them. You don't need to save them. You can go to the other one as well. It'll open it up. So sometimes when you're working on multiple monitors, if you lose an image, you can actually use that same trick to get it to actually come back again. So at any rate, depth map. So this is going to be in class 11, I think. Yeah, if you go to your class 11, inside your student folder for session 11, there's a PDS called, a PSD called depth map. If you open this guy up, it's a familiar image. I'm going to double click on the hand. So if we take a look at this, yes, does your alls have a whole set of check layers and everything? It's not check layers, but adjustment layers that are sitting on the very top. Have you got like all of this into one? I just want to make sure you got the same file that I have. Inadvertently, every now and then I'll work on a file that's actually in the student folder, and I'll end up, my student version is not what you guys have, so I just want to make sure you have the same thing. So to use a depth map for on this image, you probably know this. If you don't know this, you're going to know it now. If you're trying to recreate depth of field that a lens would really have, it gets to be tricky. So the way a lot of people will do, I'll show you the way most people do it old school, and then I'll show you how you really should be doing it new school. So if you come to the very top of your adjustment layer, so we're going to come up to the very, very, very top, because I'm going to do a merge stamp version of all of this. So up to the very top, and then we're going to do a merge stamp of everything. Command, Option, Shift, and the letter E. We'll do a merge stamp version of this. I'm going to then convert this to a smart object. So up to the layer menu, down to smart objects, convert to smart object. So basically I've just got I've got the background, the girl, all the adjustment layers, everything else that's on here has all been merged into one layer, and it's now a smart object. And then because it is a smart object, I can use smart filters on it. So I'm going to come up to the filter menu, and I'm going to come down to blur, down to Gaussian blur. And I'm going to hit this pretty hard just so that you can sort of see the effect. So I'm going to hit this up to like, typically I'll really overdo this. I'm going to even hit it a little harder here because it's a smart filter. We'll be able to come back and readjust this later. But because it's a smart filter, this will, because I'm overdoing it, it just makes it easier for me to see where the figure part in this should actually be. So that's the thing that I'm going to go after in all this. You know, I take that back. I've done this completely wrong. Hang on, hit cancel. Go back in history where we did that stamp. Go back to when this thing just opened. I don't want to stamp the figure. I want to stamp just the background because otherwise I'm going to blur the entire figure. So what we need to do is turn off everything that is, so from the girl composite layer on up. Just if you click and hold your mouse down, you can actually just drag up and it will remove all of that. And then also there's a folder that's got shadows in them. You can click to turn those off as well. And then come back down to just your background layer. So we don't really have anything that's impacting this background layer. It's all by itself. I'm going to make a copy of this. So Command J. I'm going to turn that background into Smart Object. So up to the Layer menu, down to Smart Objects, Convert to Smart Object. And then again, I'm going to blur just the background. You can turn the girl and everything else back on, so you can turn all of the other layers back on so that we can sort of see what's going on, but we're only going to be working on the smart object that's underneath it. So you will just see the background blur. The girl will actually stay sharp, and her shadows will also stay sharp. So with the background layer selected, that is now a smart object, come up to the filter, down to blur, down to Gaussian blur. And again, I'm going to crank this up really hard. I'm going to hit this like around a 40, 50, 45. That's where I'm going to go for mine, whatever. And I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. But now if you take a look at it, you have a mask for your smart filter. That's what's actually going on right down here. So what I want to do is I want part of the foreground to be blurry. I want the area right around her feet to be sharp, and then I want the rest of the background to also be blurry. So to do that, I'm actually going to use a reflected gradient to do that. So hit the G key to get the gradient tool. Make sure it is still a classic gradient. Again, sometime in my life I'll really explore the new gradient, but for right now I know this works. In the drop-down menu for the type of gradient, make sure that you still have foreground to background. Again, black to white, because that's what my colors are. But now if you take a look at the icons that are sitting up at the top, there was the linear gradient was the first one. That was what we were just playing with. As we're going from the icons at the top, from the one to the far left, if you go to the one that's next to it, that's the radial gradient. That's the one we used to make shadows. If you go to the next one, they call it an angle gradient. If you go to the next one, so this would be the fourth across, going left to right. And if you hover over it, it's called a reflected gradient. If you click on that, what ends up happening is that this will then go from foreground to foreground again. So if you come down to sort of see what's happening, you'll see it actually happen in the layer mask. So make sure that you click on the not the layer mask, but the smart filter mask, because what I want to do is I want to hide areas of this blur and reveal areas of the blur. So then I'm going to click, and I'm simply going to drag down. Look at where I'm doing this here. I'm going to sort of click starting about her knees and come down to the same distance, roughly about under her foot, and I'm going to let go. And what you can see is that this is now actually, if you take a look at this smart filter mask, where it is white, it is revealing the blur. So you can actually see it's blurred in the background. But then as we start to come down, you can also see that it actually gets sharp. That's where the black area of this mask is, of this gradient is, where it's transition. If you hold down your Option key and click on the mask, where it is transitioning here is going from completely blurred to the black, where the blur is being completely hidden. So this is my transition that you would expect with a depth of field adjustment. And then finally, it goes back again to white, which is what is allowing the click on your smart object if you want to see it again, which is which is making the foreground soft again. So this is kind of a depth of field. It works pretty well. I realize that my gradient is wrong though. I started up too high. So again, it's got too much background that's still really sharp. So instead, I'm just going to drag over it again. Make sure that you've got the gradient mask, or the smart filter mask is the one that's selected, and just pull another gradient. Instead of starting up by her knee, I'm going to start at the top of her boot and go down a little bit more. And you can see it's pulling this more into focus. I still think that's going too far in the background, so I'm going to start then halfway in the middle of her boot and drag down a little bit. And this is now giving me where I think my plane of focus should be on my background. But again, it's too soft. But you do this so that you can really establish where this is. If you're using a really small amount of blur, it's really hard to spot where the gradient is actually landing on this. So now I can double click on the Gaussian blur, open it up and drag this down to something that's believable. So I'm going to pull this back down to sort of a 10. That's kind of looking about right for me in here. And so this would be one way to sort of fake depth of field. And you can see if you use your preview to turn it on and off, you can go ahead and say okay to that part here, that's basically what's going on here. You can also use the eyeball to turn this on and off to sort of see what's happening. And that's actually a good way to begin to work this. The problem with this is that by the time I actually really get to this background part, there's the tree is actually just as blurred as the top of my image. So the tree right here, because if you take a look at the gradient where it actually is, it's only dark in this area that's right here in the lower part of my image. By the time I get up to the tree is being hit just as hard as the leaves that are clearly much further away from my camera. And that's not going to work for me really. Not only that, Gaussian blur, although it does blur things very well, it doesn't work the same way a lens works and what depth of field really is. So Photoshop has actually gone to all the trouble to recreate physically, or not, based on physics. They've actually got a model that exists in Photoshop that will recreate a lens, and it actually recreates exactly how a lens works, complete with shutter blades and number of shutter blades and the whole 9 yards. And that's what we're going to use to do a better version of this. Since we've already got this going though right now, if you actually then turn off, we'll see a comparison here. Go ahead and turn off that smart object, just turn the eyeball off, but we're going to leave it intact. But with it off, now I'm going to go to the very top of my layer stack. We'll do this one thing right here. We'll be able to get through this probably in the next 15 minutes. We'll take a break. So up at the very, very top, hold down again, make sure that blur, our original one, is turned off, the Gaussian blur one. Make sure that guy is turned off. Hold down the Command Option Shift and the letter E, and it will do a merge stamp version up to the very top. Now unfortunately you have to do it this way because we can't turn this into a smart object because the lens emulator that we're going to use will not work on a smart object. So you have to do this. It's a dedicated layer. This would be the last step in your compositing. You would try to make this your last step. Again, once you do this, truly the last step in compositing is sharpening for whatever your output is. So you would clearly do the depth of field on this first. But you want everything else already done. You want all your color grading done. You want all of that kind of stuff done because all of this has to happen on a single layer. We are going to use the depth map on this single layer. So you can actually double click on the layer and call it DOF, depth of field. And then we need to make what they call a depth map. And so what happens in a depth map is where anything on a depth map is black, it actually hides any sort of focus effect that we're going to actually add to it. Wherever it's white, you get the complete impact of that focus effect. But wherever you have middle grays, it's a gradual thing. So if you think back to a gradient again, whatever on our image that is black is actually going to be sharp in focus. Whatever then is pure white in our image will be the most out of focus. But then all of those tones of gray that exist in the middle will be somewhere between completely sharp and completely out of focus. Does that make sense to everyone what we're going for here? Okay, so we've got to build that map, and we've got a lot of the tools. Again, you guys thought that, wow, how crazy could this man be about being able to knock figures out and do all that kind of stuff. Once you get this figure separated out, building these things becomes a dream. So that's what we're going to do. So to start with this, I'm actually going to start using an adjustment layer. So we're going to add an adjustment layer that goes on top of this. So if you click on your adjustment layer, we are actually going to pick gradient. We are not going to pick gradient map. We are going to pick gradient. So in my case, it's the second one from the very top. Again, we're using things to generate the depth map. Once we get it, then we'll use it to apply to this layer. So temporarily, we're just going to bring up the gradient, and it'll bring up this depth map. In the gradient fill layer adjustment box that opens up, it's easiest to do this using, if you click on this drop down menu, it gives you again that same set of previews. In our case, we do not want to use foreground to background color because it's impossible. You see when I turn that on, it's impossible to see where the gradient is in relationship to the figure. I need to see the figure. So in the beginning, I'm going to actually set this to foreground color to transparent. So it's the second one. Again, open up the basics drop-down menu and click this, and you'll see you have a black, in my case, a black line at the bottom. Are you guys kind of close to this? Is it you're looking like this? Is anybody not? Okay. We need to change the kind of gradient this is. So you can actually, this was just in the icon, the drop-down menu for the icon. Click outside of that. Do not click OK. Just click outside of that to get that to close up. Then in terms of the style, click on the style, and this, you need to use that drop-down menu, and you want to say reflected gradient. And you'll see in my case, I get this black line that goes right through the middle here, and then it goes to transparency on both sides. Before we actually do this, we're actually going to change it back to foreground to background color so that it will go from black to white, but this allows me to see it. Then you can actually click on the gradient on your image and you can move this up and down. So as long as we're just building this, you will actually be able to move it. Once this happens, you can't move it anymore, but this will allow you to move it. And what we want to do is we want to bring the black area down to her feet area, because again, I want the area of the background that's right underneath her feet to be sharp. But then you'll see I've almost got no black that's on the very foreground right here. It's actually gone to transparency. And then clearly the back is happening the same thing. You can control how big the spread is, though, by using scale. So if you hover over the word that says scale, you can actually drag it down, and you'll notice that your gradient is getting tighter. So what we need to do is we need to figure out what you think a depth of field would really be. When does it start to soften up, depending on the aperture of your lens? I'm going to pump mine up a little bit more than this, and then drag it again. This just lets me see it. I want to make sure that it's right underneath her feet, because again, my depth of field, if I had focused on her, the very front of her feet would be actually the sharpest point, because it would be pretty much in line with the rest of her body. So I'm going to pull this down. If you want the same figure that I've got in here, it's actually 41 degrees. If for some reason there's something happening in your image where it's not just a perfectly horizontal line like this, if you needed to actually change the way your depth of field would work, you can use angle. You can actually sit here and twist it, and you'll see that it'll move the angle. So now this would be more like if I was using a view camera and it actually put a swing into the very front or the very back. This is a way that you can emulate depth of field that is not just from the front of your camera directly back. It's actually off axis. Does that make sense? For those of you who've used view camera, you'll know what I'm talking about. For those of you who haven't, it doesn't matter. Anyway, I'm going to reset this. I'm going to just type in 90, so it just brings it back to where it's supposed to be. So I'm feeling pretty good about mine right now. If you want the same scale that I've got, it was a 41 degrees, 41%. So I'm going to go ahead and, again, before you say OK, click on that drop-down menu and change the type of gradient from foreground to transparency to black to white. So now it's in the right place. I know where it is, and this is basically what's going to be the beginning of my gradient map right here. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. And you'll notice now that I actually get that same little gradient recontrol tool, because apparently this was not a classic gradient, but that's okay. I don't need this part. Then I'm going to turn this off temporarily, and I'm going to add a blank layer on top of this. So I'm going to add another layer on top of this because I need to build other parts in here. The first part is I'm going to build is for the girl. So scroll down in your image. You need to find the silhouette, the isolation of the girl. So mine is called Composite Body 2. If you hold down the Command key or Control key, click on this to load her as a selection. Then go up to the very top, make sure that you've now got your top empty layer selected. It's above the gradient, but the gradient is now turned off. You could actually leave the gradient on if you wanted to, but for my purposes, I'm going to leave it off because we need to add other things to it in just a second. You're going to fill this now with black. So again, black is my foreground color. Option delete fills it with black. Command D to deselect. If you turn on the gradient now, you'll actually see this is beginning to build this. The ground right underneath the girl is going to be completely sharp, but then it's going to fade as it starts to come. As it starts to move to the bottom of my image, it's going to start getting softer. As it starts to go to the top of my image, it starts to getting softer. However, the girl herself is going to be completely in focus because she's entirely in black. I'm going to turn off my gradient again because, again, I need to see parts of my image. And then I need to think about elements in my image that I want to be mid-ground focus. And so I'm looking at the trees to be mid-ground focus and maybe some of the rocks, but the tree for sure. The stuff that's on the ground, maybe not so much. You can make these things incredibly complex. So I'm going to keep this one relatively simple just so that you can see how this works and understand how this works. And then when you're actually building your own, you can get as complicated as you want to with these. You can actually go in and hand paint these as well. But anyway, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to select the tree. So select the depth of field layer because you want to be able, if you stayed on that top layer, there's nothing to select because it's transparent. Select the depth of field layer because I want to go after the tree. Grab the quick selection tool and make it larger in that case. And just drag it across the tree. I want to select the entire tree. And you want to select the roots and that kind of stuff that are actually around it. I'm going to zoom in and look at the area here that I feel like I need to clean it up. You can see it wasn't a perfect selection. So I'm going to hold down the Option key and click to get rid of that. Oh, that was also not another one. And do the same thing down here a little bit lower. I'm going to turn the eyeball of the girl off. I want to see what's going on underneath this. Actually, I'm going to do this instead because I want to get some of the area back behind her as well. Hit Command D to deselect. Turn off your depth of field version. Turn off the girl. Come all the way back down to your original background. I'm going to double click the hand to kick back out because I want to do a selection of things that I feel like are in that sort of same path area. So now again, with just that showing, I'm going to go back to the quick selection tool. I'm going to select the entire tree. The roots as well, and then I've got some a little bit of cleaning up to do, which was just what I did before, holding down the Option key to trim out the stuff that's around the tree as well. So the tree is pretty well selected, but I've also got some of the stones and that kind of stuff that are also in here. So I'm going to make my quick selection tool much smaller, and I'm just going to start tapping around to select some of them that are roughly about in that same distance away as the tree. I'm not really going to bother with the ground that's around there, but sort of I got 3 kind of rocks in here. The rocks are actually going to be more important, so that's actually feeling pretty good to me. So I'm feeling kind of good about that. I'm going to go all the way back up now to my figure that's at the very top that's got the girl on there that's actually black. I'm going to turn her back on. I'm going to turn my gradient back on as well. Working on the very top layer that's got the black girl on here, I'm going to fill this with a middle gray. Again, I don't want it to be white, that will be fully out of focus, but I don't want it to be black, that will be completely sharp. So I'm going to click on my foreground color picker, it'll open up, and if you have your brightness in your HSB group going, I've got black as my entire image. If you, in this case, you would want your, it doesn't matter what your hue is, your saturation should be at 0, and then just type in 50% for your brightness. It'll give you exactly a middle gray, and I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. And then on this very same layer, actually I take that back, not on this layer. I'm going to add a brand new layer on top of this. I'm going to fill this with that foreground color. Option delete will fill it with the foreground color. And the reason I didn't want to do that on the same one is that because this is then would actually make this area of the girl, the stuff that's right over her, the top of her shorts, it would also throw that slightly out of focus. I'm going to Command D to deselect, and I'm going to just drag the girl up on top of this. So basically what I've got is now, if I double click on my hand, I have got the tree is a middle gray, the girl is black, the thing by her feet is black, and then a couple of the other things back there are also that kind of middle gray. You could, in this, realize or accept the fact, if you turn the girl off, that this whole area right in here is going to be somewhat middle gray to sort of help that. So I'm just going to connect all of this. I'm going to hit the B key to get a brush. Make sure that you are working on that middle gray layer, our middle focus layer. I'm going to make sure that this is a medium hard brush. 100% opacity, 100% flow, normal blending mode. Make it a little bit smaller. I've still got middle gray is my foreground color, the color I'm going to paint on. And I'm just going to connect these. And that's all I'm going to do. Okay, turn the girl back on. Right now I can just see it's a black and white image. I've got black at the feet, black figure, gray on the tree in the background, gray on some of the rocks, and a little bit of gray connecting that. Has everybody's got a screen that looks somewhat like this? Okay, then simply go to your channels and copy either the red, green, or the blue. It doesn't matter. This is a black and white image, so I'm just going to copy the blue channel by clicking on it and dragging it down to the little square with the plus in the middle. Double click on that and rename it depth map, because that is what it is. Then you can come over, and the layers that you used to build that depth map have done their work. You can throw them away. So I'm going to click on the girl, throw her away, throw away the trees in the background, and throw away the gradient, and turn your depth of field layer back on and make it active. Are we all good? All right. Then this is where this lens filter correction thing is. Come up to your filter menu, down to blur, down to lens blur, right here in the middle. And again, don't do this. I just want to show you guys why we're not working on a smart object, because you know me, I typically, if I can, it's going to be a smart object. But don't do this, just watch my screen really quickly. I'm going to convert this to a smart object really fast. Hello. And then I'm going to right back up to that filter, down to blur, and you'll see lens blur is grayed out. You can't do it. Again, I don't know exactly. The math behind this gets so complicated. I don't know why, but it's never been that way. So this non-smart object is the only way you can really do this. So anyway, I just undid my smart object, up to filter, down to blur, down to lens blur. And you'll see this brings you into a completely different workspace. Now this is something inside of Photoshop. You'll also see this thing takes forever to do. So if you look up at the very top of your screen on the right hand side, for me, I start with, I leave my preview on, but I click on the faster version of here to give me a faster preview. It dumbs the math down a little bit. So this will allow me to sort of put my variables in place. And then I will click on more accurate to do the final render before it actually happens on my image. Make sense? All right. So if you take a look at your blur focal distance, what this really is it's what it, oh, I'm sorry. So preview's on, faster's on. In your drop-down menu for your depth map source, if you click on that, it will allow you to actually select that channel that we just made that is a depth map. You'll also see that there's other things in here. All these are our channels that are existing. So if you had another channel that was like, say you had done a knockout and you had labeled it as the knockout of the girl and that was a mask on here, that would also be an option for you to use here. But in our case, we're going to pick depth map. Everybody had that right, I hope? Okay, the focal distance has to do with, you can actually see that the image right now is started to blur a little bit. If you take a look at the radius, I'm going to skip over focal distance for just a second, but come down to radius. You can crank your radius up and put yours probably around a 50, just so that we can sort of see what's going on. If you then take a look at the set focal point, I've gone back up. This is the area right underneath the depth map. If you click on this and then come over to your image and click on the tree, this will actually refocus your image. Sorry, you need to get it. It needs to be the little icon. So click on it and you'll come over. You'll see it looks like it changes your cursor to have this like square attached to it. Click on the tree. It focuses the tree and the girl goes out of focus. This is exactly like taking a lens and focusing it. That's what's really happening here. Does that sort of make sense, everyone? It goes beyond that. If you actually click back on the girl, you will you can see that you'll reset the focus on her. That's what this focal distance is about. Now, we've built this into the depth map, so there's no real reason to use this, but a lot of people feel like this blur focal distance is the amount of blur. It isn't. It's where you're telling the lens you want to focus in this scene. By creating a depth map, what you've really done, you haven't said, okay, I want this in focus, that out of focus. You haven't said any of that. What you're telling Photoshop is, what's your foreground, what's your midground, and what is your background. That's what the map has done. But that's all it's done. It hasn't done so you say that, okay, you can click on the very background and you'll say, and it will go sharp because you've said, okay, I want the background, I want to focus on the background. And then what happens to the figure is just a consequence of that, just like it would be with a real lens. Make sense? All right. We don't have it here, but you do have bokeh control in this. Some people call it bokeh. I don't really get into that fight. But nonetheless, if you look at your radius, you can actually drag your radius up. I'm going to hit mine a little bit harder just so that you can see the effect and make it a little bit more pronounced. So I'm going to go up to like a 70. We'll pull it back down when we're actually ready to set this. But shape, if you click on the drop-down shape here, this will emulate lens apertures. So a typical lens aperture, if you look at a really high-end, especially like a view camera lens, it can have 16 blades actually make up that focus, make up that aperture part. And you guys probably know this, that when you get something way out of focus that does cause bokeh, so lights in the background at night are a classic one that people see. It will actually have a shape to it. Sometimes it looks like a stop. Sometimes those do you guys know what I'm talking about? The bokeh will actually look like a stop sign. That's determined by the number of blades that are in the aperture of the lens. So if you have an 8-bladed aperture, you will get 8 sides on your bokeh. If you have a 4-bladed aperture, you'll get 4 on your bokeh. If you have 20 on your aperture, you start to lose the sides. It actually starts to become more round. So more expensive lenses that have higher number of blades actually have smoother bokeh. They're end up being more circles as opposed to hardcore shapes. If you've got a really cheap camera, they can actually get down to only 3 blades. We'll set up your aperture. They look like triangles. They look like pyramids. So that's what you're controlling right here. I'm going to leave mine as a 6-blade hexagon because that's pretty close to what most like Canons and Nikons would actually be. But again, we don't necessarily see the effect. You mean you'll pick up part of it on something that's got a really highlight, but you're not going to pick up a whole lot more. You can actually change the curvature of these blades, so you can actually bend the blades. That's what these things down here are about. You can rotate the blades. So typically, if you think about a stop sign that's actually, how many sides does a stop sign have? 1, 2, 3, it's 6, right? Does it have 8? Okay, so, well, anyway, regardless of, whatever it is, if you take a look at a stop sign, typically the top side of it is flat. You can use this rotation to actually rotate that so that maybe the point is up at the top instead of the flat edge. I mean, that's what this is all about. Again, you're using these controls to rebuild your lens. Okay, so anyway, that's what's going on. Then once you get down here to the spectral highlights, again, we don't really have any in here, but this is where you control bokeh. So if you have something, again, if it was a night scene that had been shot and you have a pinpoint of light in the background and it is in your depth map as being far away, this will allow you to control the bokeh and the spectral highlight, and you can control what actually is considered a pinpoint of light and what's not. And that's actually done by using the brightness and the threshold sliders. Make sense? So the brightness will make your spectral highlight brighter. The threshold has to do with what do you really consider to be a highlight in your image. Now in this case it's set to 255, so you're saying, well, anything that's page white I'm going to consider as that, but anything that's less. If you wanted to bring this down, then all of a sudden things that are sort of like extremely light but not white in your image will actually then bokeh. So it's just to control that. But then finally, and this is the one people fuck up all the time, it's the noise part. This is the biggest reason that doing the Gaussian blur doesn't work, is that if you've got an image that it's not necessarily noise, but digital images have grain. You can actually see it. If you zoom way in, there's a coarseness to it that actually gives it its edge. It doesn't look like a painting. it's got grain. When you blur your images like this, you lose that grain because we're blurring the image. So to restore that sense of grain, you actually need to add noise, and that's what happens at the very bottom. Now, in most cases, the noise that you want to add, I keep mine on uniform because it makes it the same overall. If you put it into Gaussian blur, that would be if you were trying to emulate. So what happens is that, you guys have, most of you have shot film. If you look at the grain of film, it's not perfectly uniform. You'll have parts of it that are a little bit bigger, parts of it that are a little bit smaller. If that's what you want to emulate, you would pick Gaussian instead of uniform. So I'm going to go ahead and pick Gaussian. Grain typically is monochromatic. You don't have, again, we're not trying to recreate noise here. We're trying to recreate grain. So I'm going to leave this on monochrome as well. And then you need to zoom in. We're going to leave this on, and you'll see every time you zoom this in, it's got to do a re-render and a redraw. But as long as we keep this on fast, hopefully it'll work. At least everyone's been paid. No, just kidding. It's so mean. It's so evil, mean. I'm so sorry. It's like what? Yeah, kinda. Yeah, kinda. Okay, if we zoom in really close on this, I'm in on her shoulder part right here. I have got a grain amount of 2. If you kick your grain all the way down and you eliminate it, so I'm going to drag it down to 0, you'll see exactly what I mean in this when it renders. So you can see I've still got grain in her body, but I don't have any grain in the background. And again, the 2 just don't match. So for me, a grain of like 1 or 2 is actually going to be appropriate for this image, but it all has to do with the resolution of your image. So I'm sort of like looking at her jacket, but I'm also looking at her skin, and I'm also looking at her hair in here. And I can also see that I didn't really do a great job at removing the spill and all that kind of stuff. So that gives me something that I feel like is close. It's like a 1 or a 2 is where I'm going to go with this whole thing. However, the blur is way too strong in here, so I'm going to zip back out. Unfortunately, when you zip in and out, it does a complete re-render because this is actually how it's doing it faster or slower. It doesn't have to render the entire image. And then I'm going to simply back this off. I think the amount of blur that I'm throwing in here, this 67 is too much. So I'm going to kick this back down. I'm going to go to like into the mid-30s. Make sure that the renders happen. Use your preview button on and off to give you a sense of what you're really doing here. Does that feel right? Again, unfortunately, the preview part takes forever. That still feels a little strong to me. So I'm going to drop it down into like the mid-20s. And again, do my preview on and off. Look what that's doing to the background in the very back. It's just insanely beautiful. That actually feels right to me. What do you guys think? I'm mid-20s. Seems about right. So go ahead and click on more accurate then now. It'll do a final render. And make sure, again, check it to make sure that nothing radically changed and say okay. Come over to your history panel now and do a snapshot of that, and we'll call this depth map. Turn that one off. Go back down and turn your figure back on. This is where we had just the entire composite on without the soft background at all. I'm going to do another color snapshot of that, and we'll just call it no depth of field or no blur. And then finally turn on the original Gaussian blur, blurry background one that we actually had on here, and do a final snapshot and call it GB Gaussian blur. And then I'm going to zoom in just a little bit on this image. I want to see the whole figure. It's a little too much right there. And go to the very top of your history palette. And you can actually turn on, there's a depth map at the very top. That's just the name of the file that when it got opened. So you can click on your depth of field one, the no blur one, back to your depth of field one, no blur one. It definitely needs the depth of field. The depth of field pulls that whole composite together, don't you think? And then try your GB, and the GB just blurs the shit out of all of it. I don't believe that for a minute. Game changer. Questions? All right. Let's call this, I'm going to be really generous today. 3, I know, right? I was going to say 3 o'clock. It's not really. Let's just make, if you guys can be back at 10 after 3, that'd be great. We'll jump in. We'll do composites after this. I know it's a full 13 minutes. I want to go to your head.
Who are you?
Yeah. Yes. That'll actually be a great call. We'll do that as soon as we get back. Thank you for reminding me.